Huli na lima I ka lepo, ola. Malo'o na lima I ka la, ohe. Turn your hands into the soil, life. Hands drying in the sun, nothing. When I was 17 years old, I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. 2 years into my enlistment, I was deployed to Saudi Arabia as a member of the 1st Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, an infantry unit. At that time, our mission was very simple. Eject the Iraqi army from Kuwait and replace it with the legitimate government of Kuwait. As we began the invasion, the Iraqi army ignited over 730 oil wells dotting the landscape. On the first day into the Al Wafra oil field, I was able to count over 120 oil fires. By 4:30 on the first day, the entire sky was black. Later on that afternoon, it began to rain, and the soot from the oil fires covered us, blacking out everything. As we returned from Kuwait City back to Saudi Arabia, I was able to see the ocean for the first time. Now, as an island-born person, as a ʻāina, a child of the land, someone who had always grown up near the ocean and in the mountains and in the streams, I always looked to the ocean as a place of peace and solace. But as we came closer to the ocean, I was able to see for a distance, and as far as I could see, dead seabirds and dead fish lined the shoreline. Over 130 million gallons of crude oil had been dumped into the ocean. I came away from that experience physically unharmed, but deeply, deeply troubled by the way that humanity, all of us, could abuse and degrade the land, something that is so important to all of us, something that I identified with. As I reflect on it now, it makes me think of the words of Aldo Leopold, one of the founders of ecology. He said that we abuse land because we regard it as a commodity. But there is another way of having a relationship with land, and that has to begin with love and respect. Several years later, I was on the island of Bougainville in Papua New Guinea, the North Solomons province of Papua New Guinea, doing my doctoral research. And a part of my research was focusing on how Pacific Island communities have always related to their land. One day I was sitting with a friend looking out over the ocean, and I just asked him, "How do you relate to your land?" And he looked at me and he held my gaze for a long time. And finally he held his hand up and he kind of pulled on his skin like this. He said, "Our land is like the skin on the back of my hand. It is who we are. It is our identity. Everything that we can say we are is because of the way that we relate to our land." In fact, he pointed to some coconut trees and he said, "From the coconut trees that you see around here, the palm fronds, we make into baskets, and those baskets catch our children when they're born." And he pointed to some lower trees. And in those lower trees, he said, are the umbilical cord and the placentas of our children. When our elders are sick, we collect the medicines that grow on our land. There is another way of relating to the land, one that benefits our children and our children's children. Not long after my experiences on Bougainville, I was able to come back home to Maui, born and raised there. I started a position as the project manager for the Maui Coastal Land Trust, which later became the Hawaiian Islands Land Trust, who had just recently purchased a 277-acre wetlands and coastal dunes refuge. 277 acres, 105 acres of sand dunes, 27 acres of wetlands, a mile and a half of coast, but more importantly, 88 state-listed archaeological sites, and a history of human habitation dating back over 1,000 years. However, this land was badly in need of healing, covered with invasive species such as the African grasses and invasive trees like those you see here from South and Central America. The dunes you see here in the foreground once held probably between 800,000 and 1.2 million seabirds. These dunes, known as Mauna Ihi, sacred to the goddess Haumea. For over 20,000 years since these dunes had blown up, it had been the habitat to this bird, the uaukani. For generations upon generations, these birds had thrived in this land. And then, with the introduction of predators, slowly that population began to dwindle. Until finally, in about 2004, one gentleman who just carelessly brought his dog onto the refuge, not thinking, no malicious intent, but allowed his dog to wander free. Within a few minutes, literally within a few minutes, it had killed the last remaining 18 breeding pairs of birds. Unfortunately, you see me holding those birds. But of course, destruction is not the final word. We've begun a project, what we call the Lanai ʻāina, caretakers, developing caretakers. You could say they're volunteers, but they've taken on the kuleana, the responsibility of actually caring for the land, to heal it. And in the process of healing it, what we've been able to do is to actually build a community. The kupuna you see here, the elder you see here, born and raised in Waihe'e, born and raised on the land. In fact, at 76 years old, she's able to tell us things that we would never have known. For example, just recently, she said, this is the area that I remember where they used to haul up the canoes. And that now gives us insight into the past, gives us a window into the past so that we can understand better the land use patterns, how people related to their land. And of course, we do the work of removing the invasive species. And of course, when I look at this, it reminds me of the Olelo No'eau, the proverb. He ali'i ka'aina, he kaua ke kanaka. The land is the chief, people are the servants. But we also plant. Like you see here, the planting of the ahuava, the wetlands plants. In traditional times, if you walked in front of someone's home, someone who didn't know you, they would call out to you, "E ho'i mai, e ai, come and eat." That was fulfilling a very important cultural value known as ho'i ho'i, reciprocity, of taking, which is fine, but also giving back. Lokahi and laulima, unity and collaboration. Those two concepts being so important throughout the Pacific, that for thousands of years, people throughout the Pacific have been able to thrive because we built communities that were deeply connected to the land. I recall the words of Sia Figiel, a Samoan author, who said, "There's no such thing as I. I does not exist. I is always we." So what have we accomplished in the 9 years since we began the restoration work? Well, we've restored about 50 acres back to native vegetation. The ecosystem is proving to be incredibly resilient. Here you see a photograph of the Kapoho wetlands that now hold numerous endangered birds, like the Hawaiian stilt, the I.O. Every year we see more chicks hatching. Wonderful. We also have the Iliōholo-ika-ua-ua, the Hawaiian monk seal. About 3 years ago, we were able to see about 3 or 4 nests right along the shoreline. And we monitored them every day, and when we would see in the mornings, sometimes, in the late summer, was these baby honu, the turtles, making their way out to the ocean. But of course, the ecosystems need restoration, but the humans need to understand how to relate too. And so what we did is we got an expert group of taro farmers, those who knew how to repair, restore the lo'ikalo. And so this picture you see here is my son, who was 8 at the time, after we spent a day rebuilding the lo'ikalo, the taro patches. And of course, healing the land can also be very fun. And taro patches are just incredibly fun areas to just get swampy and muddy and throw mud around. This is after a days-long mud fight. Hulina lima I ka lepo ola. Turn your hands into the soil, you have life. When we heal the land, we heal the communities that live on the land. Look at your hand. Is it possible for us to look at our land as if we could relate to it, as if our land was like the skin on the back of our hands? I think we can. I do think we can. Thank you so much.